Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 77. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has subscribed to the show, who continues to listen, support, your likes, your shares, your comments. All that support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. Also want to thank our sponsors. Samson Equipment has been providing uncompromising quality for over 40 years. Samson products are long-lasting and made of the highest quality equipment on the market. Each project is built from the ground up with the ability to customize every need. The team at Samson focuses on developing the highest quality relationships with their customers, in addition to providing them unparalleled quality in every piece of equipment bearing the Samson name. Learn more about Samson's professional weight room solutions and the Samson standard at samsonequipment.com. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out cerberusstrength.com and use promo code STRENGTH_game to receive an extra 10% off your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Stu Roche. Stu is the Assistant Director of Sports Performance at Marquette University. In addition to his coaching role, where he oversees the training for the men's and women's lacrosse teams, as well as the men's and women's tennis teams, he is also the internship coordinator. Prior to joining Marquette, he worked as a research lab specialist at the University of Michigan from 2012 to 2015 in the Department of Orthopedic Research. During that time, he authored and co-authored multiple peer-reviewed research papers. While Roche was at Michigan, he also led the performance training for both the men's and women's rugby teams after serving as an intern with the Michigan Strength and Conditioning Department during a semester scholarship exchange program in the fall of 2011. He also spent time as an intern coach with Eastern Michigan's football program in 2015 and got a start in the profession serving in a studentship at UK Sport at Loughborough University as a sport and exercise biochemistry worker. Roche is the founder of My Momentum Pro, a nonprofit that champions the growth of youth and young professionals in the field of strength conditioning. My Momentum is an online platform and organization designed for the aspiring performance coach, which provides resources and a community for individuals aiming to enter the sports performance coaching profession. Originally hailing from Stamford, England, Roche was a rugby athlete throughout his high school and college playing in both the UK and overseas in the United States. Nowadays, he continues to strength train and challenge himself physically and mentally, most recently completing an 1,000-mile bike ride the length of the United Kingdom. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Stu Roche. How's it going today, everybody? Today, I have Coach Stu Roche on the show. How's it going today, Coach?
It's going great. Thanks, Coach. Really appreciate you having me on. Excited to chat about what's going on.
Awesome. Hey, I know there's a lot of stuff going on. We're kind of recording this a little bit before the release date, but for right now, you and me live. First off, congrats on the birth of your son. So new father and coach. I know you got a lot on your plate this summer. So congrats, first of all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's been a fun summer. Yeah, and we talked a little bit offline with paternity leave has been awesome. So yeah, can't vouch for taking the time to be with your newborn and start a pretty awesome relationship. So it's been great.
That's great. No, it's fantastic. Like I said, to kind of have that opportunity to really not miss those moments. And I know that you'll be hopping right back into coaching pretty soon. So just kind of like that, I want to hop right into what really initially got you started in the strength game, like performance training and strength training. What kind of sports did you play growing up, and what's kind of led you to what you're currently doing, which is a lot of strength training, and then even cycling.
Yeah, bit of a twist recently. Yeah, I mean, I played sports, as with most of us growing up for my whole life, really. Initially, so I'm part of an Air Force family. My dad was a fast jet pilot in the Royal Air Force for his entire career. So we like bumped around a bunch in Europe, lived in Germany a few times, and Denmark, Scotland, England for the vast majority, which is where I'm from originally. And so, with that, boarding school is a pretty common option for a lot of Air Force brats. So went to boarding school from the age of 9, basically, which was just an awesome experience. And a lot of the emphasis placed in boarding school is on sport, really, and like development through sport and academics and other extracurriculars and stuff like that. So yeah, I played tons of different sports, but rugby was like primarily the sport I played most growing up, since the age of 9. And then a lot of tennis, swimming, field hockey is pretty big for men in Europe. So I played field hockey quite a lot. A bit of cricket in the summers. So yeah, it was pretty varied, really, across my whole childhood. And then, like I mentioned, rugby was really the sport that I stuck with moving up through high school and university. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but was fortunate enough to come across to the States and play some rugby in the States as well. But hung up the boots on that a couple of years back. So now it's really just training to compete, and kind of reveling in the joys of having played rugby, but no longer involved in that kind of sport anymore.
No, that's great. No, that varied experience and having so many different like athletic adventures, like from boarding school and moving around a bunch, and obviously seeing a lot of sports that are not necessarily kind of known a whole lot about in the US, like cricket. Even rugby is kind of foreign to a lot of people. I know you got to kind of coach a little bit too when you were at Michigan and working with those rugby teams. Like you said, you played tennis too, and that's one of the programs you work with. But how has that kind of experience, like with all the varied sports, kind of helped you? Because you didn't mention lacrosse, but lacrosse is one of the sports that now you coach. So like having a varied background in all these different sports, how has that kind of helped you start to learn a new sport now as a coach?
Yeah, I think massively, really. And yeah, interestingly, so I went to university to study sport and exercise science, back home at Loughborough. And during that time, obviously, I thought that I wanted to be, lab-based, true sports scientist. And during that time as well, when I was at uni, I decided to do some coaching qualifications for rugby skills coaching, as a coach of the game itself. So spent multiple hours per week at a local military academy, coaching some of their like under 16 and under 15 men's teams or boys teams in rugby. And the process of getting accredited to be a coach through the Rugby Football Union was a really nice one. Very, very structured about what you had to do to become qualified. And they'd covered in that elements of obviously player safety and player physical prep, and then all the tactical and technical elements of coaching the game. So that was a really nice introduction to actually how to coach holistically and have steadfast plans laid out ahead of time. And then after being, well, during my time at Loughborough, I did a study abroad semester at the University of Michigan, which was really my first introduction to the US and to the NCAA, because during that time, that was 2010 when I came out, social media was around, but we still didn't really hear that much about the NCAA, and there certainly weren't, Instagram pages for every sports performance program, out there. So I had no idea what I was stepping into, and to step into Ann Arbor and see, 114,000 people congregate on a city to watch 18-year-olds run around a field was just mind-blowing to me. So that was my first introduction to the fact that really you could be a strength conditioning coach and that could be a career for you. So that piqued my interest initially. Went back home, finished my undergrad at Loughborough, and then immediately came back out and did my first formal internship at Michigan in Olympic sports with Bo Sandoval, who's now at Texas A&M, and then Kate Haycock and Lou Porciazzo are still at Michigan. So that was my kind of first step into it, and kind of almost the rest is history from there. But yeah, like I said, that coaching foundation course with the Rugby Football Union laid a really nice base for me, so that when I came over to the States, even though I hadn't really had any experience in strength and conditioning during my undergrad, I felt pretty comfortable stepping into a coaching role and understanding what the processes in general look like. And from there, I've just been able to apply those things moving forward. And obviously now being a strength and conditioning coach full time, it's kind of second hat. It's easy enough to apply. But yeah, I certainly think that those experiences definitely helped.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting start to a coaching career. And I know everybody's path is a little bit different, but to come from the UK over to the States and that be kind of your first taste of what coaching looks like, and like you said, what the NCAA looks like, it's very different when most people that are from the US and go to a college or go to a university, you're kind of emulating what college athletes are doing like at the high school setting. So you kind of know what the NCAA is. You're watching those games. So you kind of have a small understanding of what to expect when you get there. But you kind of were just coming over and then in a different career path too. So that's cool to see how it shifted to coaching and you were able to have the opportunity to come back and actually do an internship and work with the Michigan program a little bit more. And you kind of said it with the rugby, like obviously like Australia is pretty good in it too. The UK is pretty good where the skills side of sports, there's accreditation that goes into it and there's a foundation built to how you can actually coach and build up to higher level programs. I know you've kind of taken that similar approach, it seems like, for like your internship program. Is that kind of a fair way to assess like how you kind of work as the internship coordinator now at Marquette, like how you kind of set a foundational level and then build upon that? Were those some of those tools taken from like the accreditation programs that you were kind of part of in the lab setting and then over in the UK?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say they are. Just having a stepwise progression to how you're developing people, whether they're athletes or coaches themselves, in young coaches who are coming through, and meeting them where they're at. And I'm sure we'll talk more deeply on this, but a lot of the coaches that we see come through our internship are entirely green. It's their first year of their undergraduate. You go to XFIS 101, give a little talk in their class, say, hey, you can be an S&C if you want to be, and this is what it looks like. And then the next day you have 10 people show up at 6 a.m. to come and start interning. You're not expecting them to have any knowledge about what's going on. So you juxtapose that kind of coach with somebody who joins you for a summer semester who might have already graduated. They already have 2 or 3 internships under their belt. Then obviously approaching their development is going to be much different. So I think there's always been the influence of those coaching accreditations and your ability to understand what's in front of you and think, okay, how am I going to be able to best help this individual based on their history, where they are now and where they want to go. I couldn't agree with that more.
So when you actually came back over from Michigan, well, like came back to the second time from Michigan, how was your kind of internship experience? Obviously, we'll get into it a little bit later with like my momentum and the seminars and your internship curriculum and kind of how you're running everything. But you had a lot of experience like in a vast amount of sports. Like you played at a pretty high level with rugby. You were accustomed to a lot of things, but it wasn't, to your words, it wasn't the same as the NCAA, and you still had a lot to kind of learn. And you were originally kind of in that lab setting. So having all that kind of background, how quickly were you kind of adjust to the internship format and like adjusting to that college setting? Because that's a unique position to be in, probably as an older candidate for an internship, but someone that doesn't really have the same base of knowledge or just familiarity that someone else might come in fresh or green.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really eye-opening experience to say the least. I'd had 1 or 2 shadowing opportunities at home in the UK, which really amounted to like going in for 5 days for 1 week, basically with somebody who was working with UK athletics. And even then it was, somebody working with a short sprinter, just one-on-one. And I was 20 feet behind them, trying to listen into what they were saying, and just observing what was going on. So I didn't really have any concept of collegiate structured team training and what that looked like. So yeah, you can imagine stepping onto campus at the University of Michigan and seeing, the swim and dive team come through. Men's lacrosse there had actually just transitioned from a club sport to a varsity, an NCAA sport for them. So that was really interesting to be involved with that, because you could see, even like myself coming into the collegiate system as a aspiring coach, I was kind of, treading water, keeping my head above the water, trying to figure out what was going on and get my bearings. And it was the same for these men's lacrosse guys who just come from the club. Many of them come from the club program at Michigan, and then a few more being injected from elsewhere. You could see that, they and I were the same person, just trying to figure out, what the hell is going on. So yeah, it was really eye-opening, and it was like amazing to me, and it still is amazing to me what student athletes do and what we ask them to do with their 20-hour commitment per week to train and go to film and be in meetings and then still be a student athlete. And, many of them being 4.0 student athletes. It's just insane to me. So yeah, I had a great initial experience at Michigan, and that was the fall semester really of 2011. They had a nicely laid out curriculum at the time as well. They were, and I presume they probably still are, pretty Olympic lifting heavy. And that was really my first exposure as well to Olympic lifting techniques. I've never really done them myself in my own training, because my own training prior to coming to the States was pretty rudimentary in nature. So that was great to learn those skill sets as well. And then following that internship experience with Michigan, I managed to stay at Michigan for a period of 3 years, not actually working in athletics, but working, my full-time role was in orthopedic research. So I would do that during the day. And then in the mornings and evenings surrounding that, just as you kind of alluded to, I worked with the men's and women's club rugby programs, leading up their physical prep elements as well. But I'd drop back in every now and again to the Olympic sports and just be somebody who could be called on when they needed an extra hand to get something done. And in an evening or a weekend, I could be there to assist with sessions as needed. So it was really nice to stay in touch with them. And we managed to do a couple of development sessions with the rugby team in the athletic facilities, like once every now and again, just to show them what it's like to train at that kind of level. So yeah, it's a really nice relationship I formed then, and still chat to Lou and Caitlin on a pretty frequent basis as well. So yeah, they're good eggs for sure.
No, that's great. It's cool to see when you're first, like you came back over to see your hand in so many different pots, like still kind of working through the research, still being able to now kind of coach, still having a good connection with the Olympic staff, and still kind of learning what the NCAA was, what collegiate strength conditioning is. I know that took you to another internship with like Eastern Michigan, working with a football program before. Then you got to Marquette, where you've been for going on more than 7 years now, right?
Yeah, correct. Eighth season now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So I won't even ask you, because obviously like the mentorship process seems like a very high thing on your priority list. But I will ask you, like when you're looking at bringing in, you kind of alluded to it too, there's vastly different types of interns that come in. There's some that are green that don't really understand what it entails. Maybe some of them don't even understand if they want to be in the college setting. So I'm sure you probably separate those a few, like in the volunteer positions or like full-time fellows, or however you guys kind of word it. But more importantly, how do you really kind of manage all those different ones? And then how do you kind of work on developing them as part of the staff? Because I know you have a lot of pieces that you've taken from your career to try to boost them into fulfilling them into like full-time roles.
Yeah. Mentorship really is pretty foundational in my eyes to this profession. I don't think it's unique. I think a lot of people suggest it is the most unique thing to strength conditioning, but I'm sure there are plenty of fields out there that also have mentorship built into learning the craft of what they do. But I definitely think it's like integral to a coach's development. Nobody, including me, nobody ever got where they are just by themselves. There's always been people who had touches on you along the way, and whether those are formal mentorships over time or they're just kind of short-lived relationships, all of them help to push you in a certain direction. So yeah, I'm huge on it. I really enjoy coach development process. It's one of my passions for sure, alongside with physical development and coaching in general. And so yeah, just as you asked, with different coaches that arrive on your doorstep or send you an email of interest, and they have different levels of experience and knowledge, it's really my role to evaluate that and say, first and foremost, one, is Marquette really the best fit, or currently where we are at Marquette, is that really the best fit for what you want to do? So I like to be really transparent and upfront and approachable with all of the young coaches I get the pleasure of working with, because I never want to put them in a situation where they're here, they move across the country, for example, they're here for 2 weeks, and then they realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or this isn't where I'm going to be able to cut my teeth and develop the way I want to. So yeah, we have a pretty informal but transparent conversation about, what have you done up to this point? What are your goals? What do you know about us? And how do you think that can help you? And then that evaluation process then obviously leads to further conversations and probably a decision as to whether we offer, and that's not meaning to sound grandiose as if it's some kind of, incredible role that they're taking on, but an offer of them to come to Marquette and develop. And if they do come, then yeah, we have a couple of different plans, not necessarily like formally bucketed into different areas, but we'll have a couple of different plans as to, if you are coming in and you've had, like I say, multiple different experiences and you have a specific goal in mind. For example, we're very fortunate at Marquette to have a good budget. We have a lot of high-level technology in the weight room and in the building that we're in general, because we have a research component to it. And so if somebody wants to really focus on their technological competencies, then we'll lay out more of a specific plan for them as to how they're going to do that on a weekly and a monthly basis, so that at the end of their 3 or 4 month experience that are with us, they can put their hand on their heart and say, that was time well spent, and I can show how I've developed over that time. And we can obviously speak a bit more about the ins and outs of all that if you want to as well.
No, that's awesome. I like what you kind of talk about. Obviously, like I do the same thing over at Jacksonville. We kind of talked a little bit about how that's been kind of going for us. And obviously, I know we'll go into it later, but using my momentum and the platform and everything that you've been created, obviously we're kind of like tiptoeing around what that is. But really wanted to kind of dive into what your like philosophy with internship and stuff was before we got into what you've kind of created as your like quote unquote baby. But when you're kind of determining the right fit for these people, obviously we said there's so many different backgrounds, there's so many different things that you guys can offer. There's so many things that an intern or a potential candidate can kind of offer Marquette or whatever university they're applying for. Like what do you kind of look for as like the quote unquote fit? Is there a feel component to it? Is there like a mutual beneficial relationship to it? Or like in your opinion, what kind of constitutes like this is the right person for this position? And because some coaches will just get multiple ones and make it kind of like a pyramid scheme where we're going to have 4 people out of rack just because we need bodies. And some people might get to the point where if they're not qualified enough, it's kind of a detriment to the program. So let's just not have anybody. It might put a more burden on the full-time staff, but rather than kind of water down our program, let's stay with like qualified people. Are any of those thought processes kind of like make sense, or how do you kind of go about finding the right people for the program and the right people for them to be part of your program as well?
Yeah, so I guess my thoughts on those things have changed or evolved over time. I'm not one to say, when I speak to an 18-year-old on the phone and they're interested in coming to Marquette to develop, who am I to say whether they're going to be, the good candidate or not? You can't really tell from a phone call. So I think it's often difficult, and it's obviously like a bit of a leap of faith for the internship coordinator. It's a bit of obviously a leap of faith for the candidate as well. But in all honesty, it really boils down to, one, do they come across as being a good person first and foremost? But secondly, are they truly interested? Can you tell that they have an interest in not necessarily just the field of strength conditioning, but what you are specifically doing at Marquette? And it's such a massive piece that we talk about with our interns when we bring them on and we do our professional portfolio development sessions, is we talk about, in, for example, a cover letter that you're sending, certainly you need to reference something about the individual you're talking to or the institution you're applying to as to why specifically that makes them excited to be part of that staff. And so whenever, and it's amazing how few and far between that happens. And I understand, like, people often send out these kind of mail bomb emails to everyone, but taking the time just to do, now on social media is probably the best place to go, right? To find somebody's institutional Instagram page where you can find out what they did yesterday, and maybe they've posted something like, "Oh, just took delivery of 12 new power trackers from Elite Form getting installed tomorrow." And that's an excellent way to just say, I can see that you guys are forward-thinking staff integrating VBT technology into your weight room. I want to be part of a staff like that. This is the reason why, Marquette or Jacksonville is the place that I want to come to. But yeah, I think outside of that, identifying candidates that are going to do well. Obviously, it's a bit of a crapshoot, like I say, as to evaluating that on a phone call. So typically I try to have one phone call and keep it really informal, so they're not really nervous. They can just speak from their heart as to who they are and what they want to do. And then after that, we often have a second follow-up phone call, which is a bit more formal, as to talking about their goals and aspirations, what they know about us, that kind of thing. And we kind of move forward from there. But yeah, we don't really look for specific qualifications. We don't require CSCS, SCCC, or anything like that to begin with. Obviously, if it's a coach that's been developing over a number of years and they have that, then that's great. That gives me even more faith that they're going to show up and they're going to want to put effort in. But it's not a detracting feature if somebody doesn't have that, for example.
Gotcha. No, it's awesome to kind of hear all the different ways that people approach it. And obviously, the same as you said, finding the right candidates, the right fit for your guys' program and the university that you're working at, like that's just as important as an intern finding the right fit for them. But to not limit, like, and kind of pigeonhole people to these are the prerequisites to kind of get in. It leaves it very open-ended. And I think you're absolutely right. It's very hard to figure out from a phone conversation or multiple ones or from an email, like, really to kind of convey how passionate you are sometimes. I mean, kids are nervous. They don't really understand if this is what they want to do for the next 20 years. They maybe never been out of their home state, and this is 1,000 miles away. There's so many competing factors that kind of you have to weigh when you're actually trying to figure out what it is. And you're right. It really is a crapshoot. You could bring someone in that's the best candidate of all time, and they have family troubles and they move down for 2 weeks and can go right back home because that's more important to them. And, like, rightly so. There's so many things that could kind of go into it. But yeah, specializing and not being a copy and paste resume builder is definitely good advice for anybody that really wants to get noticed. I know for sure that we here do the same thing, and we look at those resumes, and we actually read cover letters when they're not more than 2 pages long.
Yeah.
And actually, like, thoroughly look into them and read them and see if this is kind of tailored to us. And if this is a better fit, because that'll definitely make you stand out and apart from other people that are applying for the same job as you.
Yeah, 100%. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, like, the sweetest sound that any man can hear is the sound of his own name. So it's kind of not like blowing smoke up somebody's ass, but if you mention to somebody in a cover letter or an interview, specifics as to why you hold them in high regard and why they think that it's valuable to be around them or to be a part of their group, then you're saying, like, I already see myself as an insider to your group and I want to become that. And it's incredible. We actually hired an assistant back in February time, Had a long-term assistant that ended up moving on, and this was our first hire for a long time. And we had about 60 applicants or so, and there was only one of those applicants. And this is like assistant level S&C coaches, those who have been through positions before. There was only one of them that specifically mentioned reasons why, Marquette was the place they want to be in their cover letter. So it was pretty amazing. And that person was, top 3 on the depth chart as to we want to interview this person. So it stands out hugely. It goes a really long way, I think.
No, that is a great point too. There's when you've been in the positions we have and you're looking at it from our kind of vantage point, and you're seeing all these different resumes and cover letters and reference sheets like roll across your desk all the time. They blend together very quickly. So to be able to stand out, be able to kind of recognize and pinpoint a specific thing and reason why you're the right fit, or why that university is a perfect fit for you, or what you can add, or kind of just pinpoint things that kind of put you in that position almost already, like preluding to the fact that like I'm already a great fit in this way. That those are huge points too. And I think you guys do a great job of preparing all your interns for like the full-time position, which is really what an internship is supposed to be. Like if you're doing things properly and you're mentoring these coaches, and like you said, if they answer those questions, they're a good person and they want to be in the profession, they're passionate about it, then they're probably going to keep moving on. So if it's a good mentorship and you're preparing for a full-time job, I feel like your coaches are ready for that. And so with your internship stuff, how did you kind of shift, or what was kind of the rationale on My Momentum and starting that company? Because now that kind of reaches a bigger audience. And I won't take anything from you. So can you speak a little bit on how that kind of started and what really is the main goal behind the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right in that it was really the desire to be more far-reaching than I could ever be with, where my boots were on the ground at the moment at Marquette. And yeah, it came out of really just 5 or 6 years of being an internship coordinator at Marquette, based in Milwaukee in Wisconsin, a decent sized city. But the school itself doesn't really have a reputable exercise science program necessarily. Certainly doesn't have any strength conditioning related courses. And so being the larger university in town, Division I, with the basketball program being its flagship, obviously it was known about, but a lot of young coaches would, for right or wrong reasons, head out to University of Wisconsin-Madison, or down to Northwestern in Chicago to really get the big time Big Ten feel as well about that experience. So I had, 4, 5, 6 intern coaches per semester. So across that, maybe 60 or 70 young coaches that I was helping to develop. And most of them weren't really looking to be strength conditioning coaches. A lot of them were physical therapy students or athletic training students, and they wanted to get their credit hour in the weight room, which I was happy to do, because especially for those guys, hopefully if they're going to be a good PT, they're going to understand the role of a strength conditioning coach, and it's kind of the life cycle of that injured athlete. So as soon as this athlete moves on from me as a PT, they're going to go into strength conditioning again. So understanding where the road's headed was fine. But the downside of that was, of those 60 or 70 over those 4 or 5 years, I could probably count on one hand how many actually moved into strength conditioning, or either maybe on 2 hands, those that wanted to go into it, but on one hand, those that were successful in doing so. So there's just this like big attrition rate in my mind as to, how many people I was truly impacting and helping to get their way. So decided, back in probably 2018, initially had the thoughts of, can we put on some kind of event or seminar where we get coaches together from the local area, and it's more specifically focused at young professionals in the area. Waffled on that for a while. And then really, as virtue of the pandemic pushing most things online, there was that huge influx of webinars out there. Seemingly every day there was a new webinar to join, which was really cool. And then I thought, all right, this is probably something to look into, and it provides way greater accessibility for young coaches who aren't financially solvent, and able to travel around and spend a ton of money, going to these places. So by virtue of the pandemic, kind of it lit a light bulb in my mind, and I thought, okay, let's maybe leverage online and see if there's something we can do here. So really to cut a long story short, and we'll expand on it later, I'm sure, but I formed My Momentum as a nonprofit last year, and the primary goal of it is to improve the growth and trajectory of young coaches looking to enter our profession. And we do that currently in three main parts. One is education in the My Momentum seminar, which we've had 2 years of so far. The second is providing more rich and engaging information about developmental opportunities that are out there in internships and fellowships, and not just for strength conditioning. I'm trying not to be too narrow in that lane, but performance professionals in general, because now we're seeing sports science integration in a lot of athletic departments, particularly those that are higher funded. And I think we'll see that grow as well. So that's that. And that's the Connect platform, which we'll chat about. And then also grant funding, which is kind of part of the seminar itself. So being a nonprofit, wanted to be as transparent as possible to those who are supporting the nonprofit process. So a lot of the sponsors that have jumped on board with us, to say that 100% of the the revenue that's generated from the ticket sales from the seminar is immediately spun back around 180 degrees and shot back out at the attendees, so they can apply for grant funding from us to be able to get certifications or attend other seminars across the country, things that were previously out of reach. So it's kind of snowballed over time, but it's been a fun process. And I'm sure it's similar with you, Nick, with the podcast. It's like you kind of start on a bit of a whim and you're just like, we'll just see how this goes, and if it fails, it fails. I'll probably learn something in the process. But it's been a ton of fun over these the past year and a half, 2 years really, of actually getting it started and seeing where it's gone, and meeting people like yourself as a result of that.
No, like I said, when you originally reached out, probably close to 2 years ago, I loved the idea. And like selfishly, like I've always liked the internship and the mentorship process, because like I did 5 of them. And I think I told
Wow.
you that when I was talking. I was like, I've done 5 unpaid, like volunteer internships, and I wouldn't trade any of them for anything. And I think it's really helped. And just the same as I think it was probably vital for you coming from the UK and everything being pretty shock and awe. Like you said, Michigan is a very big university to step into as your first kind of welcome to what the NCAA can offer, what high level athletics looks like, and what the United States looks like. I mean, Detroit is a pretty big city. Like just that surrounding area of Michigan is big kind of shock and awe. So no, I've always thought the mentorship process is huge, and I've always wanted to give back from my internship experience. And I love like what you guys have done, and I can attest to it, because from last year's seminar, like it was awesome. Like seeing all the different people in the platform, hearing the presenters speak and go through their different topics, and then having the Q&A at certain points in time in the breakout rooms. I think it's a great idea, and it's a blessing and a curse, because I think it's unfortunate that like it took you already at a university to kind of branch out, when I feel like a lot of these schools and a lot of just the field in general should already be doing a lot of this in-house, like the grant fund stuff. I think it's awesome to be able to give back to those coaches and like use the sponsorships to help fund for young interns, which we all know are living off their parents' dime or working multiple jobs just to be able to try to break into the profession, which is oversaturated. But like departments should be able to try to fund for those things. And that's the one thing we try to do with our coach assistants, be able to pay for their certifications or pay for them to go to local seminars and things like that. And that's everything that we're talking about, is all the stuff that you're doing for your interns at Marquette, but you're trying to reach a broader audience for now with this online platform and this nonprofit. So now my hat's off to you. I think it's great. And it's fitting for it to be called My Momentum, because I hope it keeps building momentum. And I know it's been growing each and every year. So I know by the time we get closer and closer to spring and you guys get to announce the 2023 dates, I hope it's a big event and there's a lot more participation this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're eyeing up sometime in July or potentially August. Every year, it's been great because we've sought feedback from the attendees every year, and they've been super open and honest about what they're looking for. Most of the feedback is positive, which is great, but a lot of times it's like, we've had it on Mondays and Tuesdays. It's just the way that the our like speaker availability has worked out. But some have been asking for weekends, which makes sense. So we're just trying to find what works best. Again, like the whole thing is really to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, while maintaining a level of like intimacy within the seminar itself. As you mentioned, there's multiple breakout pieces and kind of leveraging this platform. I don't know if you're able to join at the end, called Gather, which is more of a metaverse style theme to it. Which we're going to be using much more heavily this year as opposed to Zoom. So, it's really, that's what it's all about. It's all about just trying to provide, not just talk about, well, let me go back here. A lot of times, and I was guilty of this as well, established coaches will talk to young coaches and they'll ask questions about, how do I break into the field? What should I be doing? And everyone says network, you got to establish your network, but nobody gives strategies as to how to actually do that. And if it's go to the national conference in Vegas and pay, $1,000 across the weekend to fly there and get hotel and have all your meals and stuff, like it's not possible. So, we wanted to provide an actual like solution as to here's a way that you can network. It's not just about sitting on Zoom, being, part of the wallpaper, being transactional, showing up and then leaving. It's really about actually like literally in this metaverse environment, walking up to people, bumping into somebody and starting a conversation. It's just kind of removing that barrier to entry that currently exists by using leveraging the online world. And then hopefully, in the future, we'll be able to do one or two in-person events here and there. But we're mainly going to keep it accessible by staying online.
No, I did get to hop on the Gather. It was interesting. I was skeptical at first because it felt like a old school Game Boy, which I felt old today telling one of my athletes about like Game Boy and he doesn't even know what it is. It's like, all right, cool. But no, I thought it was interesting how it was set up. It's pretty intricate and it does feel, as weird it is, it's still sit in front of a computer and have full on conversations. Like I've been doing it for the podcast now, so it kind of seems a little bit second nature. But it does make it feel more kind of like that seminar atmosphere, like the conference, without like obviously the financial risk that comes with it. Being able to kind of interact with people, have full on conversations, be a fly on the wall, but still be able to interact. The breakout rooms are great. Having so many different types of people in there too at different stages of their career. Hearing some of like the first year coaches talk about things and then having a different perspective. I think it's awesome. It was a good opportunity too, like from my side, just to connect and see how they're interacting. There's so many other young coaches in there. And if I only have at a smaller university, 1 or 2 interns a year, I don't know if I really have a full, like true demographic of what's going on in the profession until you do something like that.
Right.
So with where obviously like this is stepping outside of Marquette and kind of your bubble where you're working primarily with your athletes and with the other coaches, support staff. Where do you kind of see the profession going, whether good, bad, or neutral? And how do you think things like My Momentum and what do you guys really are trying to do to kind of aid in this endeavor of kind of elevating the profession as a whole?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about the profession. To be honest, I know there's a ton of different conversations, both positive and negative, about what's been happening recently and the saturation of the market and more part-time positions, whether that's a good or bad thing, stuff like that. But yeah, I'm optimistic. And I think the reason why I'm optimistic is because you're just seeing more and more members of the strength and conditioning community become more opinionated about things. And like sometimes that ends up being a bit kind of chafing and a bit brash to begin with. But normally that results in somebody taking some kind of like affirmative action to make a difference in most instances, I find. So, and it might take a bit of time, but another reason why I'm optimistic is, seeing people like Bob Alejo move up into roles of like higher administration, whereby you actually have somebody, shock surprise, in an AD level position who knows what the hell is going on in the weight room and can vouch for the value that they can provide to the student athlete experience, not necessarily value financially in terms of reducing the likelihood of injuries that costs hundreds of thousands per year, but just the value to the student athlete experience. So seeing John Waggle get his new role at Notre Dame in a similar aspect as well. So I think the more and more that those positions become available, the more likely it is that administrations and universities will start to understand the value that a sports performance department and all these new sports science departments are going to actually have on the student athlete experience, the bottom line for universities that are highly revenue generating through their football programs or basketball programs or whatever it might be. So I'm pretty optimistic. And in terms of what we're trying to do, my momentum wise, to aid in that is, again, provide better information and more consistent information to young professionals about how to position themselves well for a growth trajectory that they want. Because I feel like a lot of young individuals, and not just strength conditioning professionals, but a lot of young individuals are expecting the Cliff Notes version and the study guide version of life, do this, and not really step outside of themselves for a second and be a bit introspective and look out into the future and think, what do I actually want? How am I going to reverse engineer the process to get there? And how can I position myself best? So that's what we're going to try and do moving forwards. By the time this podcast gets released, we might be a bit further along the way of doing that, but we're trying to add another wing to the website whereby there'll be greater resources for information about moving into a graduate assistant role, what that looks like, what are going to be the trials and tribulations of that you can anticipate on the front end. Maybe you're applying for an assistant level position. Just because you're young doesn't mean you can't negotiate salary values or terms and conditions and stuff like that, so that you don't get burnt out because yes, you're entitled to this vacation, but you're not actually going to get it, stuff like that. So we're just trying to make sure that, people have a better experience from the front end rather than just blindly stepping into the profession. And then because of lack of judgment and planning, they drop out 2 or 3 years down the line.
No, that's a great point. I think I want to touch on two things because, like you said, every single intern can't just assume that they want the same thing that you do, and maybe some of them never want to be a director. Maybe some of them only want to be a director. Some of them want to be at a certain level. Young coaches coming in, like usually they're going to emulate the person that's their mentor or a specific coach. But oftentimes I feel like they try to copy their roadmap to try to get to the position they're in, but their goals don't align. And now they're trying to copy a set of cliff notes and a set of bullet points to a destination that is not really their own. And it becomes super problematic because you're just trying to check those things off. And then you get to a point and, like you said, you're either burned out or you're not really truly fulfilled in your current role. And I think that's a great point for you to kind of provide all those resources. And that's for my momentum. It seems like a great collection too of internship experiences, mentorship, mentee experiences, because if you haven't and you don't have the time, you don't have the money, or you move more quickly into the process, sometimes coaches only have one internship. I mean, the only reason I had multiple ones was because I was either kind of forced by hand to do it, or I was doing multiple things at a time to try to go get more experience. And it just turned into a formal internship. But not, I don't think it's anybody's idea. Don't copy trying to get 5 interns like I did. That doesn't get you to the position that I'm in. So that's why my momentum and having all these resources and the things is helpful, because now you can learn from the experiences of others without actually necessarily have to go through that entire curriculum or that entire internship experience. You can learn from their kind of key takeaways and their points in one confined space and kind of speed up your career process. Obviously, like learning those lessons is important, but to not make some of those fatal errors or to not get burned out on the front end, I think you're going to see a lot more longevity and more successful coaches in the career for the long run if we can kind of speed up how they're developing on the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, like, currently, recording this earlier in the year, I recognize that right now the platform of My Momentum really is just run by me, and then helping to integrate these different institutions into the Connect page itself. But in the future, we're definitely going to start to invite in more people, more coaches to have their say, to be a part of My Momentum, to be a part of the nonprofit, so that it's not just me. Because my way is not the way, and I'm sure there are so many different perspectives that we're going to lean on to help young coaches. And that's really part of the reason, actually, as well, kind of going back a little bit with the seminar, we're really really selective in a way about the coaches that we ask, or the practitioners we ask to be part of the seminar. We make sure it's 50-50 male female split every year. We really try and bring in coaches from different NCAA levels, MLB, MLS. We haven't had anybody from the NFL yet, but that will come pretty soon as well. So really just trying to get these different perspectives, so it's not just the collegiate system, because we're trying to, again, help as many performance professionals, whichever route they want to go down. If they want to go into high school or private settings, tactical, let's try and be a resource for them, so that they can, again, make better decisions about their future, and ultimately have a better growth trajectory.
No, that's great. I think, like you said, it's an awesome resource. There's a lot in the future and kind of lined up for you guys and where you were trying to take My Momentum. So I'm excited to be a part of the seminar next year and see everything that you guys update. And I'm excited to see what you guys keep going with going forward. But so now kind of, I guess, with all this, kind of to tie a bow on this, in your opinion, how would you really kind of quantify, or would you measure, like, the success of a strength conditioning program or department? Because you've created an internship curriculum, like, you're a part of the whole at Marquette as a department. You're a part of the whole as My Momentum and kind of leading the forefront of that. But how would you kind of define a successful team as a sports performance like department?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and obviously one, well, not obviously, but one that I don't think I have a super clear-cut answer to. But in my mind, there's obviously the tangible things and the intangible things about a successful department and how it operates. I think I'm super fortunate at Marquette to have the boss I have, the director I have in Todd Smith, and the fact that up until this past January, when we had one staff member leave, we've been together for basically 7 years, no turnover in staff at all. So I think looking at a department from the outside in, and again, this kind of pulls back to when young coaches are looking at places to develop, or they're applying for an assistant level position. If you see stability in a program, typically it tells you that, at least from the relational side of things are pretty solid and pretty good. Not to say that staff that have higher turnover are bad, because they might just be developing coaches to move on to other roles. That's fine as well. But I think seeing a department that has continuity in it is really important, and that speaks to the success of the leadership in particular. Obviously, there's the tangibles of improving performance and decreasing the likelihood of injury. I think a lot of us tout that we do that, but not many of us quantify that well, us included. But I think as the profession moves forward and analytics, whether we like it or not, comes into the weight room more and more and more, and we have more routes of automating things and artificial intelligence technologies and stuff like that, we're going to be able to quantify worth a little bit more. So I think it'd be a bit easier for us to understand, were we successful in doing what we had planned to do, or were we not, from a tangible standpoint. And then the intangibles, for me, one of the biggest things is like, do the student athletes love showing up at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning, after a Thursday. Those are the big things too, and getting feedback and from the sport coaches as to, what did I do well and why, what can I do better and how, and hopefully that well on my list is, outweighs the better and how list substantially. So having those kind of check-ins with your coaches and support staff and personnel who kind of supervise you, if you have that on a frequent basis, is only really going to help you comprehend whether you're approaching success, moving towards it, knowing that it's never going to be perfect, or if you're stagnant, or if you're moving in the wrong direction.
I like it. No, it's definitely a difficult question to answer, just because I think everybody in the profession is trying to ask the same question, and oftentimes it's kind of out of our hands. But to your point, like with Coach Alejo and some of these other coaches getting into elevated positions where they're athletic directors, or they're associate or assistant athletic directors, or deputies, whatever it is, that have experience and they have some knowledge of how these sports performance, the sports medicine, sports psych, all these different departments, kind of the day-to-day operations of how they actually run, what deems them kind of successful. It's easier when they're kind of overseen at how they can kind of address the situation and shed some light on it. But I think you're right. The sustainability, like the feedback that you're getting from coaches and athletes, those are things that are helpful to determine like self-worth and success as a program. But I also think, like, from interns coming into, like, to see those things and to understand if like this is a good program, if this is also a good fit for me. Not only are they a good fit for the university and for our department, I think interns really need to, you've said it too, like they really need to make that decision if it's the right fit for them. And yeah, it's an important thing for both sides, and determining success is definitely going to be a interesting conversation for the future of the profession.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so we talked about it before when you kind of were going through your transition of athletic experience. What are you kind of doing nowadays? I know that you had some big things coming up with a cycling adventure, I think with your dad, right?
Uh-huh.
And then so how was your training kind of evolved from your playing days and team sports days, now like being a full-time strength coach and now father, if that's changed a little bit too? And then what's kind of your philosophy when it comes to like training for your young intern coaches?
Yeah. Okay. I'd say my training history has been eclectic. That would be one word I'd use for it. Obviously, yeah, growing up playing rugby, played for 20 years total, and really kind of formally training since about the age of 15, I would say. Strength, power, ballistic nature, it was the predominant means and methods by which I trained, particularly when I moved to university and to the States as well. But surrounding that, one kind of lesser known thing, I guess, about me and my history was that I was always involved in like extreme sports and lifestyle sports. Growing up, it's just something we did a ton at boarding school in the hours that we had free time. So yeah, I was involved in, I'd skate a lot, mountain board, kite surf, snowboard. I did breakdancing for about 5 years, pretty competitively through university. But I think the reason I bring that up is like, I feel like looking back now, those extreme sports and lifestyle sports have influenced quite a lot how I approach movement skill acquisition for a lot of freshmen in particular, but just student athletes that I see. And I think doing those things and like interacting with the ground in different ways, learning how to roll and fall and not injure yourself, and in breaking, like knowing how to knowing where your body is in space and using, all four limbs that might be in contact with the ground all at once, or one limb, and cross body stuff. Like I feel like that had a big impact on my injury risk reduction, honestly. I never really got injured playing rugby. So I think that had a big factor to do with it. So that's kind of influenced the way that I train a little bit. Some of my athletes, in terms of looking at, I normally use a 3-part model of literacy, efficiency, expression. So, are they literate in the skills that I'm asking them to do? If they're not, then that's the lowest hanging fruit, and I need to address that first. So I've much more recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've really honed in on that concept of like repetition without repetition, and exposing them to a lot of different styles of movement in different planes with different vestibular functions and head orientation and stuff like that, just to get them used to being uncomfortable and still being able to express at a high level. So, and that can look a little bit chaotic at times, but it's also fun for a lot of the student athletes to do. So anyway, literacy to begin with, and then efficiency. Once they have good literacy in those movement competencies, then efficiency of being able to do those time and time again well, regardless of the context in which they're asked to do them, whether that's at high speed or at slow speeds, or observing oncoming objects or not. And then expression being the last one, and that typically is when we see our juniors and seniors being able to exhibit those skill sets and movements with high force characteristics or high reactive strength characteristics. Again, do those repeatedly well. So yeah, I'd say that's been the influence of kind of my own training on my coaching philosophy, like in general, from a broad perspective. And then with the intern coaches and how I help them kind of frame their development as athletes, if you want to call it that, but then coaches too, is they have to spend time under the bar. They have to understand what it feels like. And I know that's not a novel concept. I'm sure a lot of people talk about that already. But we also do this thing that's kind of fun and unique called, we call it, excuse my French, we call it What the Fuck Wednesdays, which is where we give them a social media handle to log on to Instagram. They can find any pages that they want. And typically it's like good, bad, and ugly training, basically. And let's say we have a group of 4 interns. One of them is tasked with being the scribe, with writing down the discussions that are had during this session. Then person A has to come up with 2 prep movements that they found on Instagram. One person has to come up with 3 main movements that might be more ballistic in nature or strength-based in nature. And then the last person does 2 closing movements that might be like injury risk reduction or mobility or balance under fatigue or something like that. And then we have a session, and we try all these movements, and we basically discuss the merits of the movement or the detriment of the movement. And more often than not, it comes back to being like, this is really just a Hollywood movement. We can find a better stimulus for the athlete by doing this movement, which is a lower barrier to entry. It's much safer. We don't have to require specialist equipment or setup, stuff like that. So it just addresses this problem, I think, of right now, a lot of young coaches are influenced by what they see online. And just because so-and-so person with 50,000 follows is doing this means that it must be good and I should do it. And we're trying to kind of break that stereotype a little bit and just be a bit more cerebral about thinking, okay, what is the actual movement we're trying to use? And is there, is it valid or is it not, basically? So been doing a lot of that more recently, and it's engaging for them. It's kind of meeting them where they're at and what they see on a daily basis. But then having those, come back to Jesus moments of showing them what a good barbell front squat looks like, and what, good consistent training and the solid foundational programming should look like, basically.
No, that's it's an awesome concept I haven't like formally heard, and like it's cool to see how it's kind of structured out for the interns and how you create that into a full day where they're actually practical hands-on experience. They're kind of doing a little research on the front end. They're given the tasks, and then you create a full session where you can kind of practically go through it. It's active learning, and then you guys have an engaging discussion after and see, and then eventually sometimes you come back around and just realize that you can pretty much accomplish everything with a barbell and some weights. So, but it's definitely good to kind of get all those things on there, because yeah, you're right. Like young interns coming up, just like I said before, like some of my athletes, it's crazy. They're now born in the 2000s,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's weird, and they don't get some of the sayings I have. They don't understand what a Game Boy is, like I said. Um, but yeah, the credibility for, or quote unquote credibility from some of these social medias, it's a big stereotype where people are just taking that without a grain of salt. They're just going right into this movement, and it's cool to see you kind of break that down, and because they're seeing it every single day. And if they're really engaged and they love the profession, and you see someone with 500,000 followers do this crazy movement and they're training NFL athletes, like, is it the chicken or the egg? Is that athlete already very proficient in this movement and they're just doing something novel and throwing covered sticks at them? Or
Hmm.
is this actually something that we could probably tie back in as just a good stimulus training that we can actually apply? Um, no, I think it's awesome. I think which how you kind of shape the curriculum to the coaches that you have there, and how you guys are kind of advancing the profession in your own little way. And then you're taking those concepts to my momentum, I'm sure too. I'm excited for everything you got going forward. So no, that's cool to kind of hear what you're doing. I'm definitely going to steal some ideas.
Oh, please be my guest.
Awesome, Stu. Hey, well, like any good training session, we end the show with a good finisher. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and overtime for you. So you can go rapid
All
fire,
right.
or you could take your time if you want to expand on any of them. But are you ready?
Ready.
All right, first one I got for you. Biggest influence in the strength and conditioning profession, and favorite rugby player growing up.
Okay. I'll start with the second first, just to buy me some time. Um, Favorite rugby player growing up is, being an Englishman, winning the World Cup in 2003. Has to be Johnny Wilkinson, who kicked the points over the post to kind of secure the World Cup for us. And it's just like the 1966 or whatever it was soccer team that won the World Cup. We kind of rested on that laurel for as long as we could. So we haven't won a World Cup since. So I'm still a Johnny Wilkinson fan. So I'd say he's my favorite growing up. And then biggest influence in strength conditioning, I would say, as kind of a mentor of mine, John Waggle has been a big influence to me. I think he's a super smart guy. He's obviously been a director at DePaul, and then made the decision, was a bit forward thinking, and thought, even though I have this directorship role, I'm going to leave and go and pursue a PhD at ETSU, because I know that's going to elevate my thinking and challenge me. And then moved on to Kansas City, and now he's at Notre Dame. So yeah, I really, really respect him, and what he does. So I'd say he's probably been my biggest influence to this point.
Awesome. Hey, so when you're not training or coaching, what are some of your hobbies outside of the weight room walls?
Oh yes, good question. Like I mentioned, like, love to be outdoors. Hate being stuck inside the whole time. Luckily, we had a beautiful new weight room built not too long ago, which is kind of floor to ceiling, 2-story windows, which has been a game changer. Not being stuck in a basement. So yeah, I love to be outdoors, outdoor pursuits. I guess we didn't really talk too much about the cycling trip, but doing stuff that's kind of scary at times. So getting involved with outdoor pursuits that are a little bit out of the ordinary, or going skydiving just on a whim, stuff like that. It's kind of just to keep the adrenaline pumping every now and again.
Oh yeah, the adventure. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's my fault. I know we got to touch on that too, because what was it? It was 1,000 miles. It was across UK, or how did that go? That whole bike trip.
Yeah, I'll try not to be too long about it, but basically it was just one Christmas I was like struggling for a Christmas idea for my old man, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to challenge him with this thing called the Land's End to John O'Groats challenge. And my dad's always been super active throughout his life, so yeah, threw this at him. It's basically cycling the length of Great Britain, so the southwesterly most point in England, which is known as Land's End, to the northeasterly most point in Scotland, which is called John O'Groats. So LE, Land's End, John O'Groats, JOG. So it's abbreviated to LeJog. So yeah, we did this LeJog challenge. So 14 days of cycling. under our own power, taking everything we need with us. We didn't camp. We actually stayed at just Airbnbs basically along the way, which was a bit more bougie than a lot of people do. But yeah, 1,000 miles with my old man, just me and him for those 14 days. And again, yeah, my boss here just allowing me to do that was awesome. But yeah, such an epic adventure. I think our total climbing feet across the whole trip was 1.65 Everests. So 34,000 feet of climbing across the whole trip, which was felt, shall I say. But yeah, it was really interesting. You know, we trained pretty hard for it in the 4 or 5 months leading up to the trip, which was last summer. And that was my first real foray into, you know, extreme endurance training, which was really eye-opening actually, to just dip my toe in that world. But yeah, it was awesome.
That's awesome. No, that's a cool thing to share with your dad as well. And it's definitely a cool kind of trek. And hopefully that maybe there's a future in some of those endurance sports going forward, or maybe another long bike trip in your future. But no, that's definitely a cool story. I know I wanted to hear that as well. So the next one I got for you, if you weren't coaching in strength conditioning, what do you think you would be doing as a profession? And if you could go pro or try, actually for you, just if you could try the next sport, like what's the next sport in your bucket list to do?
Man, good questions. If I wasn't coaching, like I mentioned, I've always loved being outdoors and outdoor pursuits. So I could see myself, you know, in another life, working in some kind of national park of some sort, doing what I'm not too sure, or being involved with some kind of adventure racing or adventuring organization. I think I'd enjoy that. So that would probably be what I was doing if I wasn't coaching in a different life. And then if I could go pro in the next sport, what would it be? I love kite surfing. Like growing up, I haven't done it recently, but I love kite surfing, and like the places in the world it takes you are obviously beautiful. So being able to do that as a pro would be a pretty good gig, I think.
Yeah, that I would agree. That would be a pretty cool gig. Hey, so if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself, what music is playing during your like PR attempt, and what is your go-to post-training meal?
PR attempt music typically is going to be something like Rage Against the Machine. I would say is normally a go-to, or something like Andy Mineo more recently as well. So I'd say that those two would probably be the PR attempt musics. Quite often I listen to reggae, weirdly, when I'm lifting, but definitely not country. But yeah, more often than not, bit of reggae. But I guess it depends on what you're doing. And then what was the second question?
Your best post-training meal.
Best post-training meal. I'm a big fish man, so I like salmons, tuna steaks, swordfish steak, stuff like that. So I'd probably go with a big swordfish steak with some kind of orzo rice and some roasted vegetables.
Okay. All right. So last one I got for you for overtime. What is your personal favorite form of networking or continuing education?
In terms of like continuing education, most consistently, listen to podcasts like all the time. On the drive to work, if I'm walking across campus for something, I'll just put it on for 10, 15 minutes. So I actually really enjoy podcasts that are typically a little bit shorter in length. So you just get those snippets every now and again. So yeah, definitely a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. In terms of other kind of networking events, though, more recently, I think Dan Howells, if you've heard of him, he was recently at the Astros and now he's moved back to the UK, but he has an organization called Collaborate Sports. He's been putting on a bunch of webinars, which was actually part of the impetus as to us doing our seminar, kind of a similar model with the multiple breakouts and interactions. So he does that. He runs many more than we do. We're obviously just a once yearly kind of event. I think he does at least maybe 1 or 2 per month quite frequently. So, and I'm pretty sure most of them are now free since he's had a couple of sponsors hop on board with him. But that's a great great networking event, because again, you get to actually meet people, and it's not so much necessarily all young professionals. It could be really anybody. So yeah, I think that's been good. And another one more recently was I think it's John Delph, with his Strength Coach Job Network. He's just recently kind of created a Discord channel, which has been running for, I want to say, about 5 or 6 months now. But I've been on that since it really started, and that's been another kind of novel and unique way for a lot of S&Cs to kind of chat online and get different people's takes on different people's things.
No, those are great. I figured I'd ask you that since you're kind of diving deep into that online world and like that gather culture and trying to connect everybody together. So I figured you had a few gems that were up your sleeve of how you were kind of staying connected with people and how you were kind of reaching out for different resources. So no, that's awesome. I definitely have to look into those a little bit more. So, hey, so for anybody that's got any questions for you, obviously all the My Momentum stuff is going to be up and running and announced in the coming, like in the very soon future. So for anybody that wants to look into it a little bit deeper or kind of follow what you guys are doing, or maybe even interested in interning with you and the rest of the Marquette staff, where can they kind of get a hold of you and see the My Momentum?
Yeah, for My Momentum specific stuff, it's probably easiest to go to the website there. So it's just mymomentumpro.com. And there's a form there to be able to contact us, but I just get those emails directly to my phone. So I normally see them every day and respond to those. So that email address is just contact.mymomentum@gmail.com. So that's that. And then obviously with Instagram, reply to any DMs. So feel free to hit us up on DM there. With Marquette specific stuff, we have our internship page obviously listed on My Momentum Connect as well. So you can find out information there. But if you wanted to reach me directly at Marquette, then just my first and last name, stuart.roche@marquette.edu. And I also have a personal Instagram channel, but it's not super exciting. You know, if you wanted to see the bike trip, that's on there. If you want to see pictures of my wife and my dog, they're on there as well. But outside of that, not too much going on. But yeah, more than happy for people to reach out and connect.
Awesome, Stu. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing everything with you got going on. Congratulations again. And I'm excited to hear more from you and keep up with everything that you got going on, as well as My Momentum for the future to come. So thanks again for coming on today, Coach.
Yeah, cheers, Nick. Thanks for the invitation. And I appreciate you putting on this nice resource, nice podcast for everyone to listen to. I know it takes a lot of time and energy and effort, and you do an excellent job of it. So I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, Coach.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.